million of bonds held by the insurance company and bank at amortized cost.
This is in accord with standard accounting procedures used in those industries and also in accord with the realities of their business operations, where it is quite unlikely that bonds will have to be sold before maturity.
At today's historically low bond prices, however, our bonds have a market value substantially below carrying value, probably on the order of $10 per share of BH stock.
Between DRC and BH, we have four main operating businesses, with three of them, in my opinion, definitely first class by any of the usual standards of evaluation. The three excellent businesses are all run by men over 60 who are largely responsible for building each operation from scratch.
These men are hard-working, wealthy, and good, extraordinarily good. Their age is a negative, but it is the only negative applicable to them. One of the reasons I am happy to have a large segment of my capital in BH and DRC is because we have such excellent men in charge of the operating businesses. We have various annual reports, audits, interim reports, proxy materials, prospectuses, etc., applicable to our control holdings, and we will be glad to supply you with any item you request. I also solicit your written questions and will send to all partners the questions and answers shortly before year-end. Don't hesitate to ask any question at all that comes to mind. If it isn't clear to you, it probably isn't clear to others, and there is no reason for any of you to be wondering about something that I might clear up. DRC and BH presently pay no dividends and will probably pay either no dividends or very modest dividends for some years to come. There are a number of reasons for this. Both parent companies have borrowed money. We want to maintain a good level of protection for depositors at the bank and policyholders at the insurance company. Some of the operating companies have very satisfactory ways to utilize additional capital, and we are hopeful of finding new businesses to both diversify and augment our earning power. My personal opinion is that the intrinsic value of DRC and BH will grow substantially over the years. While no one knows the future, I would be disappointed if such growth wasn't at a rate of approximately 10% per annum. Market prices for stocks fluctuate at great amplitudes around intrinsic value, but, over the long term, intrinsic value is virtually always reflected at some point in market price. Thus, I think both securities should be very decent long-term holdings, and I am happy to have a substantial portion of my net worth invested in them. You should be unconcerned about short-term price action when you own the securities directly, just as you were unconcerned when you owned them indirectly through BPL. I think about them as businesses, not stocks, and if the business does all right over the long term, so will the stock. I want to stress that I will not be in a managerial or partnership status with you regarding your future holdings of such securities. You will be free to do what you wish with your stock in the future, and so, of course, will I. I 138 think that there is a very high probability that I will maintain my investment in DRC and BH for a very long period, but I want no implied moral commitment to do so, nor do I wish to advise others over an indefinite future period regarding their holdings. The companies, of course, will keep all shareholders advised of their activities, and you will receive reports as issued by them, probably on a semi-annual basis. Should I continue to hold the securities, as I fully expect to do, my degree of involvement in their activities may vary depending upon my other interests. The odds are that I will take an important position on matters of policy, but I want no moral obligation to be other than a passive shareholder, should my interests develop elsewhere. We presently plan to make the initial BPL cash distribution on January 5, which will now come to at least 64% of January 1, 1969 capital less any distributions, including monthly payments, you have received from us since January 1, 1969. There is now pending a public offering, headed by Merrill, Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith, of our blue-chip stamps holdings which, if completed this month as expected, should bring the figure to at least 70%. If you wish Bill and me to give you our ideas regarding bonds in March, you should purchase U.S. Treasury bills maturing in late March with the applicable portion of the January 5 distribution. Then advise us in the last week of February of the amount you wish to invest in bonds, and we will let you know our thoughts.
About the middle of January, As soon as the exact amounts are figured and shares are received from the transfer agent after having been registered in your name, we will distribute the DRC and BH stock applicable to your partnership interest and subsequently advise you of your tax basis and acquisition date attributable to the stock.
Such shares will be legended, as described in the enclosed letter from Monin, Seidler and Ryan. These stock certificates are valuable and should be kept in a safe place. In past letters I had expressed the hope that BPL could supply a mechanism whereby you could, if you wished, automatically convert your DRC and BH to cash. I have had 2 law firms consider extensively the status of these shares in your hands following the liquidation and the accompanying letters, which should be saved and kept with the shares, give their conclusions. As you can see, it is not an area that produces simple, clear-cut guidelines.
I see no prudent way to implement the alternatives I had previously been considering. Therefore, you must follow the guidelines they set forth if you wish to dispose of your shares.
As you probably realize, the restrictions on subsequent sale apply more severely to Susie and me, because of my continued insider position, than they probably do to you. Substantial quantities of securities often are sold via the private sale option described in paragraph 3 of the opinion.
If the rules become clearer or more simplified in the future, I will be sure to let you know.
At the time of distribution of DRC and BH, I will advise you of the values applied to such shares at 1969 year-end. You will receive our audit and tax letter about the end of January.
It presently appears that sale of our blue-chip shares and a substantial increase in value of DRC and BH will bring our overall gain for the year to slightly over 6%.
My next letter will be in late December, summarizing the questions and answers regarding DRC and BH, and also supplying a final estimate on the January 5th cash distribution. Warren E. Buffett Webby GLK Enclosures, Legal Opinion. Monin, Seidler and Ryan Concurring Opinion, Munger, Tolles. Hills and Rickershauser 1968 Annual Report. Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. 1969 Semi-Annual Report. Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. April 3, 1969 Letter to Shareholders. Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. 1968 Annual Report. Diversified Retailing 139 Company, Inc. Financial information regarding Associated Retail Stores, Inc. Financial information regarding Illinois National Bank and Trust County 1969 Bests Report. National Indemnity Company 1969 Bests Report. National Fire and Marine Insurance Company 140 Buffett Partnership Limited. 610 Kiewit Plaza Omaha, Nebraska. 68131 Telephone 042-4110 December 26, 1969 To my partners. Our plans regarding the initial cash distribution have been finalized and we expect to mail to you on January 3 a check dated January 5, 1970 for approximately 64% of your January 1, 1969 capital, less any distributions made to you, including monthly payments, since January 1, 1969. If you have taken no monthly payments during 1969, there will be a small interest adjustment in your favor. If you have had loans from BPL, there will be an interest charge. I couldn't be more delighted about the action of the bond and stock markets from the standpoint of the timing of our liquidation. I believe practically all partners, whether they would have invested in bonds or stocks, will be far better off receiving the cash now than if we had liquidated at the end of last year. Those seeking income will receive about 40% more after tax on the same principal investment than they would have achieved only a year ago at what then seemed like generous yields. Our tax picture is virtually complete and it appears that you will have ordinary income, dividends plus interest income less ordinary loss, for federal tax purposes of about 3 3/4% of your January 1, 1969 capital. Item 1 in enclosed letter. No significant long-term capital gain or loss, and a short-term capital loss of about 8.5% of your January 1, 1969 unrealized appreciation. Item 3. These estimates are just rough approximations. Definitive figures will reach you in early February. The sale of our 371,400 shares of blue chip stamps was not completed in 1969. When the stock went into registration, it was selling at about $24 per share. The underwriters indicated a range where they expected to offer our shares, along with others, with heavy weight placed on a comparison with Sperry and Hutchinson. Shortly before the stock was to be offered, with the Dow Jones Industrials much lower but S&H virtually unchanged, they indicated a price below their former range. We reluctantly agreed and felt we had a deal, but, on the next business day, they stated that our agreed price was not feasible. We then withdrew and a much smaller offering was done. I intend to hold our block of blue chip stamps in BPL for a more advantageous disposal or eventual distribution to our partners. The odds are decent that we will do better in this manner even if it takes a year or two, than if we had participated in a very large sale into a somewhat distressed market. Unless there is a material change in the market in the next few days, I plan to value our blue chip holdings at year-end at the price received by selling shareholders on the public offering after underwriting discount and expenses. Various questions have been asked pursuant to the last letter. 1. If we are not getting a good return on the textile business of Berkshire Hathaway Inc., why do we continue to operate it? Pretty much for the reasons outlined in my letter.
I don't want to liquidate a business employing 1,100 people when the management has worked hard to improve their relative industry position, with reasonable results, and as long as the business does not require substantial additional capital investment.
I have no desire to trade severe human dislocations for a few percentage points additional return per annum. Obviously, if we faced material compulsory additional investment or sustained operating losses, the decision might have to be different, but I don't anticipate such alternatives. 141-2. How large is our investment in Sun newspapers, etc., and do we intend to expand in the newspaper, radio and TV business? The combined investment in Sun, Blacker Printing and Gateway Underwriters is a little over $1 per share of Berkshire Hathaway, and earns something less than 10 cents per share. We have no particular plans to expand in the communication field. 3. What does Gateway Underwriters do? Gateway Underwriters serves primarily as a general agent for National Indemnity Company in the state of Missouri. 4. Are there good, second men to take over from the men running the three excellent operating businesses? In any company where the founder and chief driving force behind the enterprise is still active, it is very difficult to evaluate second men. The only real way to see how someone is going to do when running a company is to let him run it. Some of our businesses have certainly been more one-man shows than the typical corporation. Subject to the foregoing caveat, I think that we do have some good, second men, coming along. 5. In what area do you plan to invest the cash in diversified retailing company, and do you intend to stick primarily to the retailing field? While we prefer the retailing field, we do not preclude anything that will make sense. We have been looking without success for 2 years for an intelligent acquisition for DRC, so we are not about to rule out any industry, if the business looks good. Pending such time as we find one or more operating businesses to buy, the money will be invested in marketable securities. 6. Why didn't DRC pay out the money it received on the sale of Hochschild, Cohn & Company? In addition to the fact that such a payment would constitute a dividend, taxable in significant part as ordinary income, there are restrictions in the bond indenture which prevent such a payout without turning over control of the company to the bondholders. 7. Will distribution of the DRC stock cause the DRC debentures to be called? After distribution of the stock, I will be the largest stockholder in DRC and, hence, the call provision will not apply. 8. How would we know if the DRC debentures were called? All stockholders and debenture holders would find out directly from the company through regular or special reports that the company issues to its security holders. There is no intention at all of calling the debentures. 9. Why did you not register our Berkshire Hathaway and diversified retailing shares so that the stock, when received by the partners, would be freely marketable? We considered this possibility but rejected it for both practical and legal considerations. I will just discuss the practicalities, since they would independently dictate the decision we made. 142 There is presently no existing market for diversified retailing, and our holdings of Berkshire Hathaway are probably 4 or 5 times the present floating supply of this stock. An attempt to quickly buy or sell a few thousand shares can easily move BH stock several points or more. We own 691,441 shares.
Were we to distribute these stocks to you via registration without an underwriting, and with the possibility that a substantial portion would be offered for sale by many sellers operating individually but virtually simultaneously, there is a real likelihood, particularly in a stock market environment such as we have seen recently, that the market for these two stocks would be little short of chaotic.
It has not seemed to me that this was the kind of situation with which I should leave you, both from the standpoint of the price level which might prevail, as well as for the reason that different partners might well have to liquidate at widely varying price levels. The more sophisticated partners might have an important edge on the less sophisticated ones, and I believe many partners might have no chance to realize the prices I anticipate using for year-end valuation. This would rightly seem most unfair to you, since I would have received some allocation of 1969 BPL profits based upon these year-end valuations. If the markets were to become distressed, I would probably come in for criticism, whether I personally bought at lower prices or, perhaps more so, if I refrained from buying. Were we to attempt to sponsor an underwriting in connection with a registration for those partners who might wish to sell, there would be, in my opinion, the likelihood that the result would still be far less than satisfactory. We have just been around this track with our holdings of blue chip stamps, where we watched the price of our stock go from 24 to 16-1/2 after announcement of the underwriting, of which we originally were to be a part. I did not want this sort of result for the partners with respect to their holdings of Berkshire and Diversified. It is my belief that, by confining sales to private placements, those partners who wish to sell will realize more for their stock, with the sophisticated partners having no marketing edge on the less knowledgeable, than would be achieved through an underwriting at this time. Also, the stock should be more likely to find its way into the hands of long-term investment-minded holders, which should mean less volatile markets in the future. We have had several phone calls from persons indicating that they wish to make private sales. We anticipate there will be no difficulty in effectuating such sales at prices related to our year-end valuations. Those partners who would prefer an underwritten distribution always have the option of having a registration of their own. I will be glad to facilitate this by placing all partners in touch with each other who indicate to me their desire to sell via registered underwriting, at their expense and through an underwriter of their choice. In this way, the expense of an underwriting, which can be considerable, would be borne by the selling partners and not by the partners as a whole. I have also had partners ask if they could participate in a registered offering in the future if I should sell shares in this manner. I think it is almost certain I will never sell stock via public offering, but, should it ever happen, I will be glad to let any of you participate in any underwritten offering in which I might be involved. In all probability, if it ever did happen, your stock would already be free, although mine would still be restricted.
I cannot make the same commitment to you regarding any private sale I might make in the future, just as I can't expect you to restrict any sale options you might have in order to include me.
10. Will you let us know if you sell your holdings of BH or DRC? You would undoubtedly know from corporate communications, reports in the press and reports to government agencies if I disposed of my holdings. I have no intention at all of doing so in the foreseeable future. I merely make no commitment not to. However, former BPL partners will have no priority over other BH or DRC security holders in obtaining information relating to their corporate activities. 11. Should I hold my BH or DRC stock? 143. I can't give you the answer on this one. All I can say is that I'm going to do so and I plan to buy more. I am very happy to have a material portion of my net worth invested in these companies on a long-term basis. Obviously, I think they will be worth significantly more money 5 or 10 years hence. Compared to most stocks, I think there is a low risk of loss.
I hope their price patterns follow a rather moderate range related to business results rather than behaving in a volatile manner related to speculative enthusiasm or depression.
Obviously, I cannot control the latter phenomena, but there is no intent to promote the stocks a la much of the distasteful general financial market activity of recent years. 12. Can I give either BH or DRC shares to my wife or children? We are advised by counsel that this is permissible, but, of course, the same restrictions on transfer that applied to you would apply to the donee of the gift. 13. Why are you waiting until March to give us your suggestions regarding bonds? January and February promise to be very busy months. Many partners may want to talk to me about their questions and objectives regarding bonds. I want to have all important BPL matters out of the way before I talk with any of them on an individual basis. I make no forecasts regarding the bond market or stock market. It may be higher or lower in March than now. After my October letter, several partners became very eager to buy bonds immediately. To date, they are much better off by waiting. The excellent quality tax-free bonds I talked about at that time with yields of 6.5% can now be bought to yield about 7%. Cordially, Warren E. Buffett Webb, GLK. Buffett Partnership Limited. 610 Kiewit Plaza, Omaha, Nebraska. 68131. Telephone 042-4110. February 25, 1970. To my partners. This letter will attempt to provide a very elementary education regarding tax-exempt bonds with emphasis on the types and maturities of bonds which we expect to help partners in purchasing next month. If you expect to use our help in the purchase of bonds, it is important that you carefully read, and, if necessary, reread this letter, as it will serve as background for the specific purchases I suggest. If you disagree with me as to conclusions regarding types of bonds or maturities, and you would have been right and I would have been wrong if you had disagreed with me on the latter point either 1 or 2 years ago, you may well be correct, but we cannot be of assistance to you in the purchase of bonds outside our area. We will simply have our hands full concentrating in our recommended area, so will be unavailable to assist or advise in the purchase of convertible bonds, corporate bonds, or short-term issues. I have tried to boil this letter down as much as possible. Some of it will be a little weighty, some a little oversimplified. I apologize for the shortcomings in advance. I have a feeling I am trying to put all the meat of a 100-page book in 10 pages, and have it read like the funny papers. Asterisk 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 asterisk. I am sure you understand that our aid in the purchase of bonds will involve no future assistance regarding either these specific bonds or general investment decisions. I want to be available at this time to be of help because of the unusual amount of cash you have received in one distribution from us. I have no desire to be in the investment counseling business, directly or indirectly, and will not be available for discussion of financial matters after March 31st. Asterisk 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 asterisk. The mechanics of tax-free bonds. For those who wish our help, we will arrange the purchase of bonds directly from municipal bond dealers throughout the country and have them confirm sale of the bonds directly to you. The confirmation should be saved as a basic document for tax purposes. You should not send a check to the bond dealer since he will deliver the bonds to your bank, along with a draft which the bank will pay by charging your account with them. In the case of bonds purchased in the secondary market, issues already outstanding, this settlement date will usually be about a week after confirmation date, whereas, on new issues, the settlement date may be as much as a month later. The settlement date is shown plainly on the confirmation ticket. In the case of new issues, this will be the second and final ticket rather than the preliminary, when issued, ticket, and you should have the funds at your bank ready to pay for the bonds on the settlement date. If you presently own treasury bills, they can be sold on a couple of days' notice by your bank upon your instructions, so you should experience no problems in having the money available on time. Interest begins to accrue to you on the settlement date, even if the bond dealer is late in getting them delivered to your bank. Bonds will be delivered in negotiable form, so-called bearer form, which makes them like currency, with 145 coupons attached. Usually the bonds are in $5,000 denominations and frequently they can be exchanged for registered bonds, sometimes at considerable expense and sometimes free. It depends upon the terms. Bonds in registered form are non-negotiable without assignment by you, since you are the registered owner on the transfer agent's books. Bonds trade almost exclusively on a bearer basis and it is virtually impossible to sell registered bonds without converting them back into bearer form. Thus, unless you are going to own great physical quantities of bonds, I recommend keeping bonds in bearer form. This means keeping them in a very safe place and clipping the coupons every 6 months. Such coupons, when clipped, can be deposited in your bank account just like checks. If you have $250,000 in bonds, this probably means about 50 separate pieces of paper, $5,000 denominations, and perhaps 6 or 8 trips a year to the safe deposit section to cut and deposit coupons. It is also possible to open a custody account with a bank where, for a fairly nominal cost, they will keep the bonds, collect the interest and preserve your records for you. For example, a bank will probably perform the custodial service for you for about $200 a year on a $250,000 portfolio. If you are interested in a custodial account, you should talk to a trust officer at your commercial bank as to the nature of their services and cost. Otherwise, you should have a safe deposit box. Taxation: the interest received upon the deposit of coupons from tax-free bonds is, of course, free from federal income taxes.
This means if you are at a 30% top federal income tax bracket, a 6% return from tax-free bonds is equivalent to about 8.5% from taxable bonds.
Thus, for most of our partners, excluding minors or some retired people, tax-free bonds will be more attractive than taxable bonds. For people with little or no income from wages or dividends, but with substantial capital, it is possible that a combination of taxable bonds, to bring taxable income up to about the 25% or 30% bracket, plus tax-free bonds will bring the highest total after-tax income. Where appropriate, we will work with you to achieve such a balance. The situation in respect to state income taxes is more complicated. In Nebraska, where the state income tax is computed as a percentage of the federal income tax, the effect is that there is no state tax on interest from tax-free bonds. My understanding of both the New York and California law is that tax-free bonds of entities within the home state are not subject to state income tax, but tax-free bonds from other states are subject to the local state income tax. I also believe that the New York City income tax exempts tax-free bonds of entities based within the state of New York, but taxes those from other states. I am no expert on state income taxes and make no attempt to post myself on changes taking place within the various states or cities. Therefore, I defer to your local tax advisor, but simply mention these few general impressions so that you will be alert to the existence of a potential problem. In Nebraska, there is no need to have any local considerations enter into the after-tax calculation. Where out-of-state issues are subject to local taxation, the effective cost of your state or municipal income tax is reduced by the benefit received from deducting it on your federal income tax return. This, of course, varies with the individual. Additionally, in some states there are various taxes on intangible property which may apply to all tax-free bonds or just those of out-of-state entities. There are none of these in Nebraska, but I cannot advise on the other states.
When bonds are bought at a discount from par and later are sold or mature, come due and get paid, the difference between the proceeds and cost is subject to capital gain or loss treatment. There are minor exceptions to this statement as, unfortunately, there are to most general statements on investments and taxes, but they will be pointed out to you should they affect any securities we recommend. This reduces the net after-tax yield by a factor involving the general rate of future capital gains taxes and the specific future tax position of the individual. Later on, we will discuss the impact of such capital gains taxes in calculating the relative attractiveness of discount bonds versus full coupon bonds. Finally, one most important point. Although the law is not completely clear, you should probably not contemplate owning tax-free bonds if you have, or expect to have, general-purpose bank or other indebtedness.
146. The law excludes the deductibility of interest on loans incurred or continued to purchase or carry tax-free bonds, and the interpretation of this statute will probably tend to be broadened as the years pass.
For example, my impression is that you have no problem if you have a mortgage against real property, unless the debt was incurred in order to acquire municipal bonds, in deducting the mortgage interest on your federal tax return, even though you own tax-free bonds at the same time.
However, I believe that if you have a general bank loan, even though the proceeds were directly used to purchase stocks, a handball court, etc.,
and the tax-free bonds are not used for security for the loan, you are asking for trouble if you deduct the interest and, at the same time, are the owner of tax-free bonds. Therefore, I would pay off bank loans before owning tax-free bonds, but I leave detailed examination of this question to you and your tax advisor.
I merely mention it to make you aware of the potential problem.
Marketability tax-free bonds are materially different from common stocks or corporate bonds in that there are literally hundreds of thousands of issues, with the great majority having very few holders.
This substantially inhibits the development of close, active markets. Whenever the city of New York or Philadelphia wants to raise money, it sells perhaps 20, 30 or 40 non-identical securities, since it will offer an issue with that many different maturities. A 6% bond of New York coming due in 1980 is a different animal from a 6% bond of New York coming due in 1981. One cannot be exchanged for the other, and a seller has to find a buyer for the specific item he holds. When you consider that New York may offer bonds several times a year, it is easy to see why just this one city may have somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 issues outstanding. Grand Island, Nebraska may have 75 issues outstanding. The average amount of each issue might be $100,000 and the average number of holders may be 6 or 8 per issue. Thus, it is absolutely impossible to have quoted markets at all times for all issues, and spreads between bids and offers may be very wide. You can't set forth in the morning to buy a specific Grand Island issue of your choosing. It may not be offered at any price, anywhere, and if you do find one seller, there is no reason why he has to be realistic compared to other offerings of similar quality. On the other hand, there are single issues such as those of the Ohio Turnpike, Illinois Turnpike, etc., that amount to $200 million or more and have thousands of bondholders owning a single entirely homogeneous and interchangeable issue. Obviously, here you get a high degree of marketability.
My impression is that marketability is generally a function of the following 3 items, in descending order of importance. 1. The size of the particular issue. 2. The size of the issuer. A $100,000 issue of the state of Ohio will be more marketable than a $100,000 issue of Podunk, Ohio. And 3. The quality of the issuer.
By far the most sales effort goes into the selling of new issues of bonds. An average of over $200 million per week of new issues comes up for sale, and the machinery of bond distribution is geared to get them sold, large or small. In my opinion, there is frequently insufficient differential in yield at time of issue for the marketability differences that will exist once the initial sales push is terminated. We have frequently run into markets in bonds where the spread between bid and asked prices may get to 15%. There is no need to buy bonds with the potential for such grotesque markets, although the profit spread to the dealer who originally offers them is frequently wider than on more marketable bonds, and we will not be buying them for you. The bonds we expect to buy will usually tend to have spreads, reflecting the difference between what you would pay net for such bonds on purchase and receive net on sale at the same point in time, of from 2% to 5%. Such a spread would be devastating if you attempted to trade in such bonds, but I don't believe it should be a deterrent for a long-term investor. The real necessity is to stay away from bonds of very limited marketability, which frequently are the type local bond dealers have the greatest monetary incentive to push. Specific areas of purchase: we will probably concentrate our purchases in the following general areas. 1. Large revenue-producing public entities such as toll roads, electric power districts, water districts, etc. 147. Many of these issues possess high marketability, are subject to quantitative analysis, and sometimes have favorable sinking fund or other factors which tend not to receive full valuation in the marketplace. 2. Industrial Development Authority bonds, which arise when a public entity holds title to property leased to a private corporation. For example, Lorain, Ohio holds title to an $80 million project for U.S. Steel Corp. The Development Authority Board issued bonds to pay for the project and has executed a net and absolute lease with U.S. Steel to cover the bond payments. The credit of the city or state is not behind the bonds, and they are only as good as the company that is on the lease. Many top-grade corporations stand behind an aggregate of several $billion of these obligations, although new ones are being issued only in small amounts, $5 million per project or less, because of changes in the tax laws. For a period of time there was a very substantial prejudice against such issues, causing them to sell at yields considerably higher than those commensurate with their inherent credit standing. This prejudice has tended to diminish, reducing the premium yields available, but I still consider it a most attractive field. Our insurance company owns a majority of its bonds in this category. 3. Public Housing Authority issues for those of you who wish the very highest grade of tax-free bonds. In effect, these bonds bear the guarantee of the U.S. government, so they are all rated AAA.
In states where local taxes put a premium on buying in-state issues, and I can't fill your needs from 1. and 2. My tendency would be to put you into housing authority issues rather than try to select from among credits that I don't understand.
If you direct me to buy obligations of your home state, you should expect substantial quantities of housing authority issues. There is no need to diversify among such issues, as they all represent the top credit available. 4. State obligations of a direct or indirect nature. You will notice I am not buying issues of large cities. I don't have the faintest idea how to analyze a New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, etc. A friend mentioned the other day when Newark was trying to sell bonds at a very fancy rate that the mafia was getting very upset because Newark was giving them a bad name. Your analysis of a New York City, and I admit it is hard to imagine them not paying their bills for any extended period of time, would be as good as mine. My approach to bonds is pretty much like my approach to stocks. If I can't understand something, I tend to forget it. Passing an opportunity which I don't understand, even if someone else is perceptive enough to analyze it and get paid well for doing it, doesn't bother me. All I want to be sure of is that I get paid well for the things I do feel capable of handling, and that I am right when I make affirmative decisions. We will probably tend to purchase somewhere between 5 and 10 issues for most of you. However, if you wish to limit me to your home state, it may be fewer issues, and perhaps those will only be housing authorities. We will try not to buy in smaller than $25,000 pieces and will prefer larger amounts where appropriate. Smaller lots of bonds are usually penalized upon resale, sometimes substantially. The bond salesman doesn't usually explain this to you when you buy the $10,000 of bonds from him, but it gets explained when you later try to sell the $10,000 to him.
We may make exceptions where we are buying secondary market issues in smaller pieces, but only if we are getting an especially good price on the buy side because of the small size of the offering. Callable bonds. We will not buy bonds where the issuer of the bonds has a right to call, retire, the bonds on a basis which substantially loads the contract in his favor. It is amazing to me to see people buy bonds which are due in 40 years, but where the issuer has the right to call the bonds at a tiny premium in 5 or 10 years. Such a contract essentially means that you have made a 40-year deal if it is advantageous to the issuer, and disadvantageous to you, and a 5-year deal if the initial contract turns out to be advantageous to you, and disadvantageous to the 148 issuer. Such contracts are really outrageous and exist because bond investors can't think through the implications of such a contract form, and bond dealers don't insist on better terms for their customers. One extremely interesting fact is that bonds with very unattractive call features sell at virtually the same yield as otherwise identical bonds which are non-callable. It should be pointed out that most Nebraska bonds carry highly unfair call provisions. Despite this severe contractual disadvantage, They do not offer higher yields than bonds with more equitable terms. One way to avoid this problem is to buy bonds which are totally non-callable.
Another way is to buy discount bonds where the right of the issuer to call the bond is at a price so far above your cost as to render the possible call inconsequential. If you buy a bond at 60 which is callable at 103, the effective cost to you of granting the issuer the right to prematurely terminate the contract, which is a right you never have, is insignificant. But to buy a bond of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power at 100 to come due at 100 in 1999 or to come due at 104 in 1974, depending on which is to the advantage of the issuer and to your disadvantage, is the height of foolishness when comparable yields are available on similar credits without such an unfair contract. Nevertheless, just such a bond was issued in October 1969 and similar bonds continue to be issued every day. I only write at such length about an obvious point, since it is apparent from the continual sale of such bonds that many investors haven't the faintest notion how this loads the dice against them and many bond salesmen aren't about to tell them. Maturity and the mathematics of bonds. Many people, in buying bonds, select maturities based on how long they think they are going to want to hold bonds, how long they are going to live, etc. While this is not a silly approach, it is not necessarily the most logical. The primary determinants in selection of maturity should probably be 1. The shape of the yield curve, 2. Your expectations regarding future levels of interest rates, and 3. The degree of quotational fluctuation you are willing to endure or hope to possibly profit from. Of course, 2 is the most important but by far the most difficult upon which to comment intelligently. Let's tackle the yield curve first. When other aspects of quality are identical, there will be a difference in interest rates paid based upon the length of the bond being offered.
For example, a top-grade bond being offered now might have a yield of 4.75% if it came due in 6 or 9 months, 5.00% in 2 years, 5.25% in 5 years, 5.50% in 10 years and 6.25% in 20 years.
When long rates are substantially higher than short rates, the curve is said to be strongly positive. In the U.S. government bond market, rates recently have tended to produce a negative yield curve. That is, a long-term government bond over the last year or so has consistently yielded less than a short-term one. Sometimes the yield curve has been very flat, and sometimes it is positive out to a given point, such as 10 years, and then flattens out. What you should understand is that it varies, often very substantially, and that on an historical basis the present slope tends to be in the high positive range.
This doesn't mean that long bonds are going to be worth more, but it does mean that you are being paid more to extend maturity than in many periods.
If yields remained constant for several years, you would do better with longer bonds than shorter bonds, regardless of how long you intended to hold them. The second factor in determining maturity selection is expectations regarding future rate levels.
Anyone who has done much predicting in this field has tended to look very foolish very fast. I did not regard rates as unattractive 1 year ago, and I was proved very wrong almost immediately. I believe present rates are not unattractive and I may look foolish again. Nevertheless, a decision has to be made, and you can make just as great a mistake if you buy short-term securities now and rates available on reinvestment in a few years are much lower.
The final factor involves your tolerance for quotational fluctuation. This involves the mathematics of bond investment and may be a little difficult for you to understand.
Nevertheless, it is important that you get a general 149 grasp of the principles.
Let's assume for the moment a perfectly flat yield curve and a non-callable bond. Further assume present rates are 5% and that you buy 2 bonds, one due in 2 years and one due in 20 years. Now assume 1 year later that yields on new issues have gone to 3% and that you wish to sell your bonds. Forgetting about market spreads, commissions, etc.
You will receive $1,019.60 for the original 2-year $1,000 bond, now with 1 year to run, and $1,288.10 for the 19-year bond, originally 20 years.
At these prices, a purchaser will get exactly 3% on his money after amortizing the premium he has paid and cashing the stream of 5% coupons attached to each bond. It is a matter of indifference to him whether to buy your 19-year 5% bond at $1,288.10 or a new 3% bond, which we have assumed is the rate current, 1 year later, at $1,000. On the other hand, let's assume rates went to 7%. Again, we will ignore commissions, capital gains taxes on the discount, etc. Now the buyer will only pay $981 for the bond with 1 year remaining until maturity and $791.60 for the bond with 19 years left.
Since he can get 7% on new issues, he is only willing to buy your bond at a discount sufficient so that accrual of this discount will give him the same economic benefits from your 5% coupon that a 7% coupon at $1,000 would give him.
The principle is simple. The wider the swings in interest rates and the longer the bond, the more the value of a bond can go up or down on an interim basis before maturity. It should be pointed out in the first example where rates went to 3%, our long-term bond would only have appreciated to about $1,070 if it had been callable in 5 years at par, although it would have gone down just as much if 7% rates had occurred. This just illustrates the inherent unfairness of call provisions.
For over 2 decades, interest rates on tax-free bonds have almost continuously gone higher and buyers of long-term bonds have continuously suffered.
This does not mean it is bad now to buy long-term bonds. It simply means that the illustration in the above paragraph has worked in only one direction for a long period of time and people are much more conscious of the downside risks from higher rates than the upside potential from lower ones.
If it is a 50-50 chance as to the future general level of interest rates and the yield curve is substantially positive, then the odds are better in buying long-term non-callable bonds than shorter-term ones.
This reflects my current conclusion and, therefore, I intend to buy bonds within the 10 to 25-year range. If you have any preferences within that range, we will try to select bonds reflecting such preferences, but if you are interested in shorter-term bonds, we will not be able to help you as we are not searching out bonds in this area. Before you decide to buy a 20-year bond, go back and read the paragraph showing how prices change based upon changes in interest rates. Of course, if you hold the bond straight through, you are going to get the contracted rate of interest, but if you sell earlier, you are going to be subject to the mathematical forces described in that paragraph, for better or for worse. Bond prices also change because of changes in quality over the years, but, in the tax-free area, this has tended to be, and probably will continue to be, a relatively minor factor compared to the impact of changes in the general structure of interest rates.
Discount versus full coupon bonds. You will have noticed in the above discussion that if you now wanted to buy a 7% return on a 19-year bond, you had a choice between buying a new 19-year bond with a 7% coupon rate or buying a bond with a 5% coupon at $791.60, which would pay you $1,000 in 19 years.
Either purchase would have yielded exactly 7% compounded semi-annually to you. Mathematically, they are the same. In the case of tax-free bonds, the equation is complicated, however, by the fact that the $70 coupon is entirely tax-free to you, whereas the bond purchased at a discount gives you tax-free income of $50 per year but a capital gain at the end of the 19th year of $208.40.
Under the present tax law, you would owe anything from a nominal tax, if the gain from realization of the discount was your only taxable income in the 19th year, up to a tax of over $70 if it came on top of very large amounts of capital gain at that time. The new tax law provides for capital gain rates of 35%, and even slightly higher on an indirect basis in 1972 and thereafter for those realizing very large 150 gains. In addition to this, you might have some state taxes to pay on the capital gain.
Obviously, under these circumstances you are not going to pay the $791.60 for the 5% coupon and feel you were equally as well off as with the 7% coupon at $1,000. Neither is anyone else. Therefore, Identical quality securities with identical maturities sell at considerably higher gross yields when they have low coupons and are priced at discounts than if they bear current high coupons. Interestingly enough, for most taxpayers, such higher gross yields overcompensate for the probable tax to be paid. This is due to several factors. First, no one knows what the tax law will be when the bonds mature, and it is both natural and probably correct to assume the tax rate will be stiffer at that time than now. Second, even though a 5% coupon on a $1,000 bond purchased at $791.60 due in 19 years is the equivalent of a 7% coupon on a $1,000 bond purchased at par with the same maturity, people prefer to get the higher current return in their pocket.
The owner of the 5% coupon bond is only getting around 6.3% current yield on his $791.60, with the balance necessary to get him up to 7% coming from the extra $208.40 he picks up at the end.
Finally, the most important factor affecting prices currently on discount bonds, and which will keep affecting them, is that banks have been taken out of the market as buyers of discount tax-free bonds by changes brought about in bank tax treatment through the 1969 Tax Reform Act. Banks have historically been the largest purchasers and owners of tax-free bonds, and anything that precludes them from one segment of the market has dramatic effects on the supply-demand situation in that segment. This may tend to give some edge to individuals in the discount tax-free market, particularly those who are not likely to be in a high tax bracket when the bonds mature or are sold. If I can get a significantly higher effective after-tax yield, allowing for sensible estimates of your particular future tax rate possibilities, I intend to purchase discount bonds for you.
I know some partners prefer full coupon bonds, even though their effective yield is less, since they prefer to maximize the current cash yield, and if they will so advise me, we will stick to full coupon issues, or very close thereto, in their cases. Procedure: I intend to be in the office solidly through March, including every Saturday except March 7th, and will be glad to see any partner or talk with him by phone.
To aid in scheduling, please make an appointment with Gladys or me. The only request I make is that you absorb as much as possible of this letter before we talk. As you can see, it would be an enormous problem if I had to explain each item to all of you. If you decide you want us to help you in buying bonds, you should let us know. 1. Whether you want to restrict purchases to your home state for local tax reasons. 2. Whether you want to restrict us to full coupon issues or let us use our judgment as to where you get the best value. 3. Your preference as to maturity in the 10 to 25-year range, or if you prefer to let us use our judgment in that area. 4. How much you want to invest. We may end up several % short of the figure you name, but we will never go over. 5. On what bank the bonds should be drafted. We will advise you by phone or letter as we buy bonds. Bill and John will be doing much of the mechanical work. Needless to say, none of us will have any financial interest in any transaction. Should you have any 151 questions regarding the mechanics, please direct them to John or Bill, as I will probably be swamped and they will be more familiar with specific transactions. After March 31st, I don't expect to be around the office for several months. Therefore, if you want to talk things over, come in by then. The completion of all purchases may go into April, but Bill will be taking care of this and the mechanics will all be set up.
You should realize that because of the enormous diversity of issues mentioned earlier, it is impossible to say just what will be bought.
Sometimes the tax-free bond market has more similarities to real estate than to stocks.
There are hundreds of thousands of items of varying comparability, some with no sellers, some with reluctant sellers, and some with eager sellers.
Which may be the best buy depends on the quality of what is being offered, how well it fits your needs, and the eagerness of the seller. The standard of comparison is always new issues where an average of several $100 million worth have to be sold each week. However, specific secondary market opportunities, issues already outstanding, may be more attractive than new issues, and we can only find out how attractive they are when we are ready to make bids. Although markets can change, it looks as if we will have no difficulty in getting in the area of 6.5% after tax, except from housing authority issues, on bonds in the 20-year maturity range. Cordially, Warren E.
Buffett Webby GLK 152 April 3, 1970 to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. 4 years ago your management committed itself to the development of more substantial and more consistent earning power than appeared possible if capital continued to be invested exclusively in the textile industry. The funds for this program were temporarily utilized in marketable securities, pending the acquisition of operating businesses meeting our investment and management criteria.
This policy has proved reasonably successful, particularly when contrasted with results achieved by firms which have continued to commit large sums to textile expansion in the face of totally inadequate returns.
We have been able to conclude 2 major purchases of operating businesses, and their successful operations enabled Berkshire Hathaway to achieve an overall return of more than 10% on average stockholders' equity last year in the face of less than a 5% return from the portion of our capital employed in the textile business.
We have liquidated our entire holdings of marketable securities over the last 2 years at a profit of more than $5 million after taxes. These gains provided important funds to facilitate our major purchase of 1969. When borrowed money to finance acquisitions was generally most difficult to obtain. We anticipate no further purchases of marketable securities, but our search for desirable acquisitions continues.
Any acquisition will, of course, be dependent upon obtaining appropriate financing.
Textile operations dollar sales volume in 1969 was approximately 12% below 1968. Net earnings were slightly higher despite substantial operating losses incurred in the termination of our box loom division. Earnings on capital employed improved modestly but still remain unsatisfactory despite strenuous efforts toward improvement. We are presently in the midst of a textile recession of greater intensity than we have seen for some years. There is an overall lack of demand for textile products in a great many end uses. This lack of demand has required curtailment of production to avoid inventory buildup. Both our menswear lining division and home fabrics division have been forced to schedule 2-week shutdowns during the first quarter of 1970, but inventories remain on the high side. The slowdown in demand appears even greater than that normally occurring in the cyclical textile market. Recovery from this cycle will probably be dependent upon federal government action on economic factors they can control. We have concentrated our textile operations in those areas that appear, from historical performance and from our market projections, to be potentially satisfactory businesses. Improvements have been made in our mill operations which, under better industry conditions, should produce substantial cost reductions. However, the present picture is for lower profits in this business during 1970. Insurance operations Jack Ringwalt and his outstanding management group turned in new records in just about every department during 1969. During another year in which the fire and casualty insurance industry experienced substantial underwriting losses, our insurance subsidiaries achieved significant adjusted underwriting profits.
Since establishment of the business in 1941, Mr. Ringwalt has held to the principle of underwriting for a profit, a policy which is frequently talked about within the industry but much less frequently achieved.
Our new surety department, although small, made good progress during the year. We are entering the workmen's compensation market in California through the establishment of a branch office in Los Angeles. Our new reinsurance division seems to be off to a strong start, although the nature of this business is such that it takes at least several years to render an intelligent verdict as to operating results. We also have interesting plans for a new home state insurance operation. Phil Leach, over 20 years a major contributor to outstanding results in the production and underwriting departments, was elected executive vice president early this year. Expectations are for continued growth in our insurance operations. Banking operations. The most significant event of 1969 for Berkshire Hathaway was the acquisition of 97.7% of the stock of the Illinois National Bank and Trust Company of Rockford, Illinois. This bank had been built by Eugene Abig, without addition of outside capital, from $250,000 of net worth and $400,000 of deposits in 1931 to $17 million of net worth and $100 million of deposits in 1969. Mr. Abig has continued as chairman and produced record operating earnings, before security losses, of approximately $2 million in 1969. Such earnings, as a percentage of either deposits or total assets, are close to the top among larger commercial banks in the country which are not primarily trust department operations. It will not be easy to achieve greater earnings in 1970 because, 1. Our bank is already a highly efficient business, and, 2. The unit banking law of Illinois makes more than modest deposit growth difficult for a major downtown bank. After almost a year of ownership, we are delighted with our investment in Illinois National Bank, and our association with Mr. Abig. Kenneth V.
Chase President 1971 Letter to the Stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. It is a pleasure to report that operating earnings in 1971, excluding capital gains, amounted to more than 14% of beginning shareholders' equity.
This result, considerably above the average of American industry, was achieved in the face of inadequate earnings in our textile operation, making clear the benefits of redeployment of capital inaugurated 5 years ago. It will continue to be the objective of management to improve return on total capitalization, long-term debt plus equity, as well as the return on equity capital. However, it should be realized that merely maintaining the present relatively high rate of return may well prove more difficult than was improvement from the very low levels of return which prevailed throughout most of the 1960s. Textile operations in common with most of the textile industry, continued to struggle throughout 1971 with inadequate gross margins. Strong efforts to hammer down costs and a continuous search for less price-sensitive fabrics produced only marginal profits. However, without these efforts we would have operated substantially in the red. Employment was more stable throughout the year as our program to improve control of inventories achieved reasonable success. As mentioned last year, Ken Chase and his management group have been swimming against a strong industry tide. This negative environment has only caused them to intensify their efforts. Currently we are witnessing a mild industry pickup which we intend to maximize with our greatly strengthened sales force. With the improvement now seen in volume and mix of business, we would expect better profitability, although not of a dramatic nature, from our textile operation in 1972. Insurance operations, an unusual combination of factors, reduced auto accident frequency, sharply higher effective rates in large volume lines, and the absence of major catastrophes, produced an extraordinarily good year for the property and casualty insurance industry. We shared in these benefits, although they are not without their negative connotations. Our traditional business, and still our largest segment, is in the specialized policy or non-standard insured. When standard markets become tight because of unprofitable industry underwriting, we experience substantial volume increases as producers look to us. This was the condition several years ago, and largely accounts for the surge of direct volume experienced in 1970 and 1971. Now that underwriting has turned very profitable on an industry-wide basis, more companies are seeking the insureds they were rejecting a short while back and rates are being cut in some areas. We continue to have underwriting profitability as our primary goal, and this may well mean a substantial decrease in National Indemnity's direct volume during 1972. Jack Ringwalt and Phil Leash continue to guide this operation in a manner matched by very few in the business. Our reinsurance business, which has been developed to a substantial operation in just 2 years by the outstanding efforts of George Young, faces much the same situation.
We entered the reinsurance business late in 1969 at a time when rates had risen substantially and capacity was tight.
The reinsurance industry was exceptionally profitable in 1971, and we are now seeing rate cutting as well as the formation of well-capitalized aggressive new competitors. These lower rates are frequently accompanied by greater exposure. Against this background, we expect to see our business curtailed somewhat in 1972. We set no volume goals in our insurance business generally, and certainly not in reinsurance, as virtually any volume can be achieved if profitability standards are ignored. When catastrophes occur and underwriting experience sours, we plan to have the resources available to handle the increasing volume which we will then expect to be available at proper prices. We inaugurated our home state insurance operation in 1970 by the formation of Cornhusker Casualty Company. To date, this has worked well from both a marketing and an underwriting standpoint. We have therefore further developed this approach by the formation of Lakeland Fire and Casualty Company in Minnesota during 1971, and Texas United Insurance in 1972. Each of these companies will devote its entire efforts to a single state, seeking to bring the agents and insureds of its area a combination of large company capability and small company accessibility and sensitivity. John Ringwalt has been in overall charge of this operation since inception. Combining hard work with imagination and intelligence, he has transformed an idea into a well-organized business.
The home state companies are still very small, accounting for a little over $1.5 million in premium volume during 1971.
It looks as though this volume will more than double in 1972, and we will develop a more creditable base upon which to evaluate underwriting performance.
A highlight of 1971 was the acquisition of Home and Automobile Insurance Company, located in Chicago. This company was built by Victor Robb from a small initial investment into a major auto insurer in Cook County, writing about $7.5 million in premium volume during 1971.
Vic is cut from the same cloth as Jack Ringwalt and Gene Abig, with a talent for operating profitably accompanied by enthusiasm for his business. These three men have built their companies from scratch and, after selling their ownership position for cash, retain every bit of the proprietary interest and pride that they have always had. While Vic has multiplied the original equity of Home and Auto many times since its founding, his ideas and talents have always been circumscribed by his capital base.
We have added capital funds to the company, which will enable it to establish branch operations extending its highly concentrated and on-the-spot marketing and claims approach to other densely populated areas.
All in all, it is questionable whether volume added by Home and Auto, plus the home state business in 1972, will offset possible declines in direct and reinsurance business of National Indemnity Company.
However, our large volume gains in 1970 and 1971 brought in additional funds for investment at a time of high interest rates, which will be of continuing benefit in future years.
Thus, despite the unimpressive prospects regarding premium volume, the outlook for investment income and overall earnings from insurance in 1972 is reasonably good. Banking operations. Our banking subsidiary, the Illinois National Bank and Trust Company, continued to lead its industry as measured by earnings as a percentage of deposits. In 1971, Illinois National earned well over 2% after tax on average deposits while 1. Not using borrowed funds except for very occasional reserve balancing transactions, 2. Maintaining a liquidity position far above average, 3. Recording loan losses far below average, and 4. Utilizing a mix of over 50% time deposits with all consumer savings accounts receiving maximum permitted interest rates throughout the year.
This reflects a superb management job by Gene Abig and Bob Klein.
Interest rates received on loans and investments were down substantially throughout the banking industry during 1971. In the last few years, Illinois National's mix of deposits has moved considerably more than the industry average away from demand money to much more expensive time money. For example, interest paid on deposits has gone from under $1.7 million in 1969 to over $2.7 million in 1971. Nevertheless, the unusual profitability of the bank has been maintained.
Marketing efforts were intensified during the year, with excellent results.
With interest rates even lower now than in 1971, the banking industry is going to have trouble achieving gains in earnings during 1972.
Our deposit gains at Illinois National continue to come in the time money area, which produces only very marginal incremental income at present. It will take very close cost control to enable Illinois National to maintain its 1971 level of earnings during 1972.
Financial. Because of the volume gains being experienced by our insurance subsidiaries early in 1971, we recast Berkshire Hathaway's bank loan so as to provide those companies with additional capital funds. This financing turned out to be particularly propitious when the opportunity to purchase home and auto occurred later in the year. Our insurance and banking subsidiaries possess a fiduciary relationship with the public. We retain a fundamental belief in operating from a very strongly financed position so as to be in a position to unquestionably fulfill our responsibilities. Thus, we will continue to map our financial future for maximum financial strength in our subsidiaries as well as at the parent company level. Warren E. Buffett, Chairman of the Board, March 13, 1972, 1972 letter to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway Inc. Operating earnings of Berkshire Hathaway during 1972 amounted to a highly satisfactory 19.8% of beginning shareholders' equity. Significant improvement was recorded in all of our major lines of business, but the most dramatic gains were in insurance underwriting profit. Due to an unusual convergence of favorable factors, diminishing auto accident frequency, moderating accident severity, and an absence of major catastrophes, underwriting profit margins achieved a level far above averages of the past or expectations of the future.
While we anticipate a modest decrease in operating earnings during 1973, it seems clear that our diversification moves of recent years have established a significantly higher base of normal earning power.
Your present management assumed policy control of the company in May 1965. 8 years later, our 1972 operating earnings of $11,116,256 represent a return many-fold higher than would have been produced had we continued to devote our resources entirely to the textile business. At the end of the 1964 fiscal year, shareholders' equity totaled $22,138,753.
Since that time, no additional equity capital has been introduced into the business, either through cash sale or through merger.
On the contrary, some stock has been reacquired, reducing outstanding shares by 14%. The increase in book value per share from $19.46 at fiscal year-end 1964 to $69.72 at 1972 year-end amounts to about 16.5% compounded annually. Our three major acquisitions of recent years have all worked out exceptionally well, from both the financial and human standpoints. In all three cases, the founders were major sellers and received significant proceeds in cash, and, in all three cases, the same individuals, Jack Ringwalt, Gene Abig and Vic Robb, have continued to run the businesses with undiminished energy and imagination, which have resulted in further improvement of the fine records previously established. We will continue to search for logical extensions of our present operations, and also for new operations which will allow us to continue to employ our capital effectively.
Textile operations. As predicted in last year's annual report, the textile industry experienced a pickup in 1972.
In recent years, Ken Chase and Ralph Rigby have developed an outstanding sales organization enjoying a growing reputation for service and reliability. Manufacturing capabilities have been restructured to complement our sales strengths. Helped by the industry recovery, we experienced some payoff from these efforts in 1972. Inventories were controlled, minimizing close-out losses in addition to minimizing capital requirements. Product mix was greatly improved.
While the general level of profitability of the industry will always be the primary factor in determining the level of our textile earnings, we believe that our relative position within the industry has noticeably improved.
The outlook for 1973 is good.
Insurance underwriting. Our exceptional underwriting profits during 1972 in the large traditional area of our insurance business at National Indemnity present a paradox.
They served to swell substantially total corporate profits for 1972, but the factors which produced such profits induced exceptional amounts of new competition at what we believe to be a non-compensatory level of rates. Overall, we probably would have retained better prospects for the next 5 years if profits had not risen so dramatically this year. Substantial new competition was forecast in our annual report for last year, and we experienced in 1972 the decline in premium volume that we stated such competition implied.
Our belief is that industry underwriting profit margins will narrow substantially in 1973 or 1974 and, in time, this may produce an environment in which our historical growth can be resumed.
Unfortunately, there is a lag between deterioration of underwriting results and tempering of competition. During this period, we expect to continue to have negative volume comparisons in our traditional operation.
Our seasoned management, headed by Jack Ringwalt and Phil Leach, will continue to underwrite to produce a profit, although not at the level of 1972, and base our rates on long-term expectations rather than short-term hopes.
Although this approach has meant dips in volume from time to time in the past, it has produced excellent long-term results. Also, as predicted in last year's report, our reinsurance division experienced many of the same competitive factors in 1972. A multitude of new organizations entered what has historically been a rather small field, and rates were often cut substantially, and we believe unsoundly, particularly in the catastrophe area. The past year turned out to be unusually free of catastrophes, and our underwriting experience was good. George Young has built a substantial and profitable reinsurance operation in just a few years. In the longer term, we plan to be a very major factor in the reinsurance field, but an immediate expansion of volume is not sensible against a background of deteriorating rates. In our view, underwriting exposures are greater than ever. When the loss potential inherent in such exposures becomes an actuality, repricing will take place, which should give us a chance to expand significantly. In the home state operation, our oldest and largest such company, Cornhusker Casualty Company, operating in Nebraska only, achieved good underwriting results. In the second full year, the home state marketing appeal has been proven with the attainment of volume on the order of 1/3 of that achieved by old line giants who have operated in the state for many decades. Our two smaller companies, in Minnesota and Texas, had unsatisfactory loss ratios on very small volume. The home state managements understand that underwriting profitably is the yardstick of success, and that operations can only be expanded significantly when it is clear that we are doing the right job in the underwriting area. Expense ratios at the new companies are also high, but that is to be expected when they are in the development stage. John Ringwalt has done an excellent job of launching this operation, and plans to expand into at least one additional state during 1973. While there is much work yet to be done, the home state operation appears to have major long-range potential. Last year it was reported that we had acquired Home and Automobile Insurance Company of Chicago. We felt good about the acquisition at the time, and we feel even better now. Led by Vic Robb, this company continued its excellent record in 1972. During 1973 we expect to enter the Florida, Dade County, and California, Los Angeles markets with the same sort of specialized urban auto coverage which Home and Auto has practiced so successfully in Cook County. Vic has the managerial capacity to run a much larger operation. Our expectation is that Home and Auto will expand significantly within a few years. Insurance investment results: we were most fortunate to experience dramatic gains in premium volume from 1969 to 1971, coincidental with virtually record high interest rates. Large amounts of investable funds were thus received at a time when they could be put to highly advantageous use.
Most of these funds were placed in tax-exempt bonds, and our investment income, which has increased from $2,025,201 in 1969 to $6,755,242 in 1972, is subject to a low effective tax rate. Our bond portfolio possesses unusually good call protection, and we will benefit for many years to come from the high average yield of the present portfolio.
The lack of current premium growth, however, will moderate substantially the growth in investment income during the next several years. Banking operations: our banking subsidiary, the Illinois Bank and Trust Company of Rockford, maintained its position of industry leadership in profitability. After tax earnings of 2.2% on average deposits in 1972 are the more remarkable when evaluated against such moderating factors as 1. A mix of 50% time deposits heavily weighted toward consumer savings instruments,
all paying the maximum rates permitted by law. 2. An unvaryingly strong liquid position and avoidance of money market borrowings. 3. A loan policy which has produced a net charge-off ratio in the last 2 years of about 5% of that of the average commercial bank.
This record is a direct tribute to the leadership of Gene Abig and Bob Klein, who run a bank where the owners and the depositors can both eat well and sleep well. During 1972, interest paid to depositors was double the amount paid in 1969. We have aggressively sought consumer time deposits, but have not pushed for large money market certificates of deposit, although, during the past several years, they have generally been a less costly source of time funds. During the past year, loans to our customers expanded approximately 38%.
This is considerably more than indicated by the enclosed balance sheet, which includes $10.9 million in short-term commercial paper in the 1971 loan total, but which has no such paper included at the end of 1972.
Our position as Rockford's leading bank was enhanced during 1972. Present rate structures, a decrease in investable funds due to new Federal Reserve collection procedures, and a probable increase in already substantial non-federal taxes make it unlikely that Illinois National will be able to increase its earnings during 1973. Financial on March 15, 1973, Berkshire Hathaway borrowed $20 million at 8% from 20 institutional lenders. This loan is due March 1, 1993, with principal repayments beginning March 1, 1979. From the proceeds, $9 million was used to repay our bank loan, and the balance is being invested in insurance subsidiaries.
Periodically, we expect that there will be opportunities to achieve significant expansion in our insurance business, and we intend to have the financial resources available to maximize such opportunities.
Our subsidiaries in banking and insurance have major fiduciary responsibilities to their customers. In these operations, we maintain capital strength far above industry norms, but still achieve a good level of profitability on such capital. We will continue to adhere to the former objective and make every effort to continue to maintain the latter. Warren E. Buffett, Chairman of the Board, March 16, 1973.
(1973) Letter to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. Our financial results for 1973 were satisfactory, with operating earnings of $11,930,592, producing a return of 17.4% on beginning stockholders' equity.
Although operating earnings improved from $11.43 to $12.18 per share, earnings on equity decreased from the 19.8% of 1972. This decline occurred because the gain in earnings was not commensurate with the increase in shareholders' investment. We had forecast in last year's report that such a decline was likely. Unfortunately, our forecast proved to be correct. Our textile, banking, and most insurance operations had good years, but certain segments of the insurance business turned in poor results. Overall, our insurance business continues to be a most attractive area in which to employ capital. Management's objective is to achieve a return on capital over the long term which averages somewhat higher than that of American industry generally, while utilizing sound accounting and debt policies. We have achieved this goal in the last few years, and are trying to take those steps which will enable us to maintain this performance in the future. Prospects for 1974 indicate some further decline in rate of return on our enlarged capital base. Textile operations. Textile demand remained unusually strong throughout 1973. Our main problems revolved around shortages of fiber, which complicated operations and resulted in something less than full utilization of loom capacity. Prices of some fibers skyrocketed during the year. Cost of living council regulations prevented the pricing of many finished products at levels of some of our competitors. However, profits were reasonably commensurate with our capital investment, although below those that apparently might have been achieved had we been able to price at market levels. The textile business has been highly cyclical, and price controls may have served to cut down some of the hills while still leaving us with the inevitable valleys. Because of the extraordinary price rises in raw materials during 1973, which show signs of continuing in 1974, we have elected to adopt the LIFO method of inventory pricing. This method more nearly matches current costs against current revenues, and minimizes inventory profits included in reported earnings. Further information on this change is included in the footnotes to our financial statements. Insurance operations during 1973. Jack Ringwalt retired as president of National Indemnity Company after an absolutely brilliant record since founding the business in 1940. He was succeeded by Phil Leach, who, fortunately for us, possesses the same underwriting and managerial philosophy that worked so well for Jack. Our traditional business, specialized auto and general liability lines conducted through National Indemnity Company and National Fire and Marine Insurance Company, had an exceptionally fine underwriting year during 1973. We again experienced a decline in volume. Competition was intense, and we passed up the chance to match rate cutting by more optimistic underwriters. There currently are faint indications that some of these competitors are learning of the inadequacy of their rates, and also of their loss reserves, which may result in easing of market pressures as the year develops. If so, we may again experience volume increases. Our reinsurance operation had a somewhat similar year, good underwriting experience, but difficulty in maintaining previous volume levels. This operation, guided by the tireless and well-directed efforts of George Young, has been a major profit producer since its inception in 1969. Our home state insurance companies made excellent progress in Nebraska and Minnesota, with both good growth in volume and acceptable loss ratios. We began operations late in the year in Iowa. To date, our big problem has been Texas. In that state, we virtually had to start over during 1973 as the initial management we selected proved incapable of underwriting successfully. The Texas experience has been expensive, and we still have our work cut out for us. Overall, however, the home state operation appears to have a promising potential. Our specialized urban auto operation, Home and Automobile Insurance Company, experienced very poor underwriting in Chicago during 1973. It would appear that rates are inadequate in our primary Cook County marketing area, although the current energy situation confuses the picture. The question is whether possible lowered accident frequency because of reduced driving will more than offset continuing inflation in medical and repair costs, as well as jury awards. We believe that inflation will hurt us more than reduced driving will help us, but some of our competitors appear to believe otherwise. Home and Auto expanded into Florida and California during the year, but it is too early to know how these moves will prove out financially. A contributing factor in our unsatisfactory earnings at Home and Auto during 1973 was an accounting system which was not bringing information to management on a sufficiently timely basis. On the investment side of our insurance operation, we made substantial additional commitments in common stocks during 1973. We had significant unrealized depreciation, over $12 million, in our common stock holdings at year-end, as indicated in our financial statements. Nevertheless, we believe that our common stock portfolio at cost represents good value in terms of intrinsic business worth. In spite of the large unrealized loss at year-end, we would expect satisfactory results from the portfolio over the longer term. Banking operations. The Illinois National Bank and Trust Company of Rockford again had a record year in 1973. Average deposits were approximately $130 million, of which approximately 60% were time deposits. Interest rates were increased substantially in the important consumer savings area when regulatory maximums were raised at mid-year. Despite this mix heavily weighted toward interest-bearing deposits, our operating earnings after taxes, including a new Illinois state income tax, were again over 2.1% of average deposits. We continue to be the largest bank in Rockford. We continue to maintain unusual liquidity. We continue to meet the increasing loan demands of our customers. And we continue to maintain our unusual profitability. This is a direct tribute to the abilities of Gene Abig, chairman, who has been running the bank since it opened its doors in 1931, and Bob Klein, our president. Merger with Diversified Retailing Company, Inc. Your directors have approved the merger of Diversified Retailing Company, Inc. into Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. on terms involving issuance of 195,000 shares of Berkshire stock for the 1 million shares of Diversified stock outstanding. Because Diversified and its subsidiaries own 109,551 shares of Berkshire, the net increase in the number of shares of Berkshire outstanding after giving effect to this transaction will not exceed 85,449. Various regulatory approvals must be obtained before this merger can be completed, and proxy material will be submitted to you later this year so that you may vote upon it. Diversified Retailing Company, Inc., though subsidiaries, operates a chain of popular-priced women's apparel stores and also conducts a reinsurance business. In the opinion of management, its most important asset is 16% of the stock of blue chip stamps. Blue chip stamps are holdings of stock in blue chip stamps at year-end amounted to approximately 19% of that company's outstanding shares. Since year-end, we have increased our holdings so that they now represent approximately 22.5%. Implementation of the proposed merger with Diversified Retailing Company, Inc. would increase this figure to about 38.5%. Our equity in earnings of blue chip stamps became significant for the first time in 1973, and posed an accounting question as to just what period's earnings should be recognized by Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. as applicable to the financial statements covered by this annual report. Blue Chip's fiscal year ends on the Saturday closest to February 28, or 2 months after the fiscal year end of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. Or, viewed alternatively, their year ends 10 months prior to Berkshire Hathaway's. An acceptable accounting choice for us, and one which, if made, would not have required an auditor's disclaimer as to scope, was to recognize in our 1973 income an equity of $632,000 in Blue Chip's earnings for their year ended March 3, 1973 with regard to the fewer shares of Blue Chip we owned during this earlier period. But such an approach seemed at odds with reality, and would have meant a 10-month lag each year in the future. Therefore, we chose to reflect as 1973 income our equity of $1,008,000 in Blue Chip's earnings based upon unaudited interim earnings through November as publicly reported by Blue Chip Stamps and with regard to our shareholdings during 1973. Because we made this choice of unaudited but current figures, as opposed to the alternative of audited but far from current figures, Pete, Marwick, Mitchell and Company were unable to express an opinion on our 1973 earnings attributable to Blue Chip Stamps. The annual report of Blue Chip Stamps, which will contain financial statements for the year ending March 2, 1974 audited by Price, Waterhouse and Company, will be available in early May. Any shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. who desires an annual report of Blue Chip Stamps may obtain it at that time by writing Mr. Robert H. Bird, Secretary, Blue Chip Stamps, 5801 Southeastern Avenue, Los Angeles, California, 90040. Blue Chip's trading stamp business has declined drastically over the past year or so, but it has important sources of earning power in its See's Candy Shop subsidiary as well as Wesco Financial Corporation, a 54% owned subsidiary engaged in the savings and loan business. We expect Blue Chip Stamps to achieve satisfactory earnings in future years related to capital employed, although certainly at a much lower level than would have been achieved if the trading stamp business had been maintained at anything close to former levels. Your chairman is on the board of directors of Blue Chip Stamps, as well as Wesco Financial Corporation, and is chairman of the board of See's Candy Shops Incorporated. Operating management of all three entities is in the hands of first-class, able, experienced executives. Sun Newspapers, Inc. In the 1969 annual report we commented on the purchase of Sun Newspapers, Inc., a group of weekly papers published in the metropolitan Omaha area.
Since that time we have not commented on their operations in the text of our annual reports, nor have we consolidated their financial results since the operation, because of the small investment involved, has been financially insignificant. During 1973, it was made quite apparent that such insignificance did not extend to publishing quality.
On May 7, Sunday Newspapers was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for local investigative reporting, the first time in history that a weekly had won in this category, for its special section of March 30, 1972 relating to Boys Town.
We reported the extraordinary contrast between decreasing services and mounting wealth that had taken place since Father Flanagan's death in 1948. In addition to the Pulitzer Prize, the reporting job also won the Public Service Award of Sigma Delta Chi, the National Society of Professional Journalists, as well as 7 other national awards.
Our congratulations go to Paul Williams, editor, and Stan Lipsey, publisher, as well as the entire editorial staff of Sun Newspapers for their achievement, which vividly illustrated that size need not be equated with significance in publishing. Warren E. Buffett, Chairman of the Board, March 29, 1974 letter to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway Inc. Operating results for 1974 overall were unsatisfactory due to the poor performance of our insurance business. In last year's annual report, some decline in profitability was predicted, but the extent of this decline, which accelerated during the year, was a surprise.
Operating earnings for 1974 were $8,383,576, or $8.56 per share, for a return on beginning shareholders' equity of 10.3%.
This is the lowest return on equity realized since 1970. Our textile division and our bank both performed very well, turning in improved results against the already good figures of 1973. However, insurance underwriting, which has been mentioned in the last several annual reports as running at levels of unsustainable profitability, turned dramatically worse as the year progressed.
The outlook for 1975 is not encouraging. We undoubtedly will have sharply negative comparisons in our textile operation and probably a moderate decline in banking earnings.
Insurance underwriting is a large question mark at this time. It certainly won't be a satisfactory year in this area, and could be an extremely poor one. Prospects are reasonably good for an improvement in both insurance investment income and our equity in earnings of blue-chip stamps. During this period, we plan to continue to build financial strength and liquidity, preparing for the time when insurance rates become adequate and we can once again aggressively pursue opportunities for growth in this area. Textile operations during the first 9 months of 1974, textile demand was exceptionally strong, resulting in very firm prices. However, in the fourth quarter, significant weaknesses began to appear, which have continued into 1975.
We currently are operating at about 1/3 of capacity.
Obviously, at such levels operating losses must result. As shipments have fallen, we continuously have adjusted our level of operations downward so as to avoid building inventory. Our products are largely in the curtain goods area.
During a period of consumer uncertainty, curtains may well be high on the list of deferrable purchases.
Very low levels of housing starts also serve to dampen demand.
In addition, retailers have been pressing to cut inventories generally, and we probably are feeling some effect from these efforts.
These negative trends should reverse in due course, and we are attempting to minimize losses until that time comes. Insurance underwriting. In the last few years, we consistently have commented on the unusual profitability in insurance underwriting. This seemed certain eventually to attract unintelligent competition with consequent inadequate rates.
It also has been apparent that many insurance organizations, major as well as minor, have been guilty of significant underreserving of losses, which inevitably produces faulty information as to the true cost of the product being sold.
In 1974, these factors, along with a high rate of inflation, combined to produce a rapid erosion in underwriting results. The costs of the product we deliver, auto repair, medical payments, compensation benefits, etc., are increasing at a rate we estimate to be in the area of 1% per month. Of course, this increase doesn't proceed in an even flow, but, inexorably, inflation grinds very heavily at the repair services, to humans and to property, that we provide. However, rates virtually have been unchanged in the property and casualty field for the last few years. With costs moving forward rapidly and prices remaining unchanged, it was not hard to predict what would happen to profit margins. Bests, the authoritative voice of the insurance industry, estimates that in 1974 all auto insurance premiums in the United States increased only about 2%. Such a growth in the pool of dollars available to pay insured losses and expenses was woefully inadequate. Obviously, medical costs applicable to people injured during the year, jury awards for pain and suffering, and body shop charges for repairing damaged cars increased at a dramatically greater rate during the year. Since premiums represent the sales dollar and the latter items represent the cost of goods sold, profit margins turned sharply negative. As this report is being written, such deterioration continues. Loss reserves for many giant companies still appear to be understated by significant amounts, which means that these competitors continue to underestimate their true costs. Not only must rates be increased sufficiently to match the month-by-month increase in cost levels, but the existed expense-revenue gap must be overcome. At this time it appears that insurers must experience even more devastating underwriting results before they take appropriate pricing action. All major areas of insurance operations, except for the home state companies, experienced significantly poorer results for the year. The direct business of National Indemnity Company, our largest area of insurance activity, produced an underwriting loss of approximately 4% after several years of high profitability. Volume increased somewhat, but we are not encouraging such increases until rates are more adequate. At some point in the cycle, after major insurance companies have had their fill of red ink, history indicates that we will experience an inflow of business at compensatory rates. This operation, headed by Phil Leach, a most able underwriter, is staffed by highly profit-oriented people, and we believe it will provide excellent earnings in most future years, as it has in the past. Intense competition in the reinsurance business has produced major losses for practically every company operating in the area. We have been no exception. Our underwriting loss was something over 12%, a horrendous figure, but probably little different from the average of the industry.
What is even more frightening is that, while about the usual number of insurance catastrophes occurred during 1974, there really was no super disaster, which might have accounted for the poor figures of the industry. Rather, a condition of inadequate rates prevails, particularly in the casualty area where we have significant exposure.
Our reinsurance department is run by George Young, an exceptionally competent and hardworking manager.
He has canceled a great many contracts where prices are totally inadequate, and is making no attempt to increase volume except in areas where premiums are commensurate with risk.
Based upon present rate levels, it seems highly unlikely that the reinsurance industry generally, or we, specifically, will have a profitable year in 1975. Our home state companies, under the leadership of John Ringwald, made good progress in 1974. We appear to be developing a sound agency group, capable of producing business with acceptable loss ratios. Our expense ratios still are much too high, but will come down as the operation develops into units of economic size. The Texas problem, which was commented upon in last year's report, seems to be improving. We consider the home state operation one of our most promising areas for the future. Our efforts to expand home and automobile insurance company into Florida proved disastrous. The underwriting loss from operations in that market will come to over $2 million, a very large portion of which was realized in 1974. We made the decision to drop out of the Florida market in the middle of 1974, but losses in substantial amounts have continued since that time because of the term nature of insurance contracts, as well as adverse development of outstanding claims. We can't blame external insurance industry conditions for this mistake. In retrospect, it is apparent that our management simply did not have the underwriting information and the pricing knowledge necessary to be operating in the area. In Cook County, where home and autos volume traditionally has been concentrated, evidence also became quite clear during 1974 that rates were inadequate. Therefore, rates were increased during the middle of the year, but competition did not follow. Consequently, our volume has dropped significantly in this area as competitors take business from us at prices that we regard as totally unrealistic. While the tone of this section is pessimistic as to 1974 and 1975, we consider the insurance business to be inherently attractive. Our overall return on capital employed in this area, even including the poor results of 1974, remains high. We have made every effort to be realistic in the calculation of loss and administrative expense. Because of accruals, this had a double effect at both the bank and corporate level in 1974.
Under present money market conditions, we expect bank earnings to be down somewhat in 1975, although we believe they still are likely to compare favorably with those of practically any banking institution in the country.
Blue chip stamps. During 1974, we increased our holdings of blue chip stamps to approximately 25.5% of the outstanding shares of that company. Overall, we are quite happy about the results of blue chip and its prospects for the future. Stamp sales continue at a greatly reduced level, but the blue chip management has done an excellent job of adjusting operating costs. The See's Candy Shops, Inc. subsidiary had an outstanding year, and has excellent prospects for the future.
Your chairman is on the board of directors of Blue Chip Stamps, as well as Wesco Financial Corporation, a 64% owned subsidiary, and is chairman of the board of See's Candy Shops, Inc.
We expect blue chip stamps to be a source of continued substantial earning power for Berkshire Hathaway, Inc.
The annual report of Blue Chip Stamps, which will contain financial statements for the year ended March 1, 1975, audited by Price, Waterhouse & Company, will be available in May.
Any shareholder of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. who desires an annual report of blue chip stamps may obtain it at any time by writing Mr. Robert H. Bird, Secretary, Blue Chip Stamps, 5801 Southeastern Avenue, Los Angeles, California, 90040. Merger with Diversified Retailing Company, Inc. As you previously have been informed, the proposed merger with Diversified Retailing Company, Inc. was terminated by the respective boards of directors on January 28, 1975. We continue to view such a merger as eventually desirable, and hope to reopen the subject at some future time. Warren E.
Buffett, Chairman of the Board, March 31, 1975. 1975 letter to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway, Inc. Last year, when discussing the prospects for 1975, we stated, "The outlook for 1975 is not encouraging." This forecast proved to be distressingly accurate. Our operating earnings for 1975 were $6,713,592, or $6.85 per share, producing a return on beginning shareholders' equity of 7.6%.
This is the lowest return on equity experienced since 1967. Furthermore, as explained later in this letter, a large segment of these earnings resulted from federal income tax refunds which will not be available to assist performance in 1976. On balance, however, current trends indicate a somewhat brighter 1976. Operations and prospects will be discussed in greater detail below, under specific industry titles.
Our expectation is that significantly better results in textiles, earnings added from recent acquisitions, an increase in equity in earnings of blue chip stamps resulting from an enlarged ownership interest, and at least a moderate improvement in insurance underwriting results will more than offset other possible negatives to produce greater earnings in 1976.
The major variable, and by far the most difficult to predict with any feeling of confidence, is the insurance underwriting result. Present very tentative indications are that underwriting improvement is in prospect. If such improvement is moderate, our overall gain in earnings in 1976 likewise will prove moderate. More significant underwriting improvement could give us a major gain in earnings.
Textile operations. During the first half of 1975, sales of textile products were extremely depressed, resulting in major production curtailments. Operations ran at a significant loss, with employment down as much as 53% from a year earlier. In contrast with previous cyclical slumps, however, Most textile producers quickly reduced production to match incoming orders, thus preventing massive industry-wide accumulation of inventories.
Such cutbacks caused quite prompt reflection at the mill operating level when demand revived at retail. As a result, beginning about mid-year, business rebounded at a fairly rapid rate. This V-shaped textile depression, while one of the sharpest on record, also became one of the shortest ones in our experience. The fourth quarter produced an excellent profit for our textile division, bringing results for the year into the black. On April 28, 1975, we acquired Wambeck Mills Incorporated and Wambeck Dyeing and Finishing Company, Inc., located in Manchester, New Hampshire.
These companies have long sold woven goods into the drapery and apparel trade.
Such drapery materials complement and extend the line already marketed through the home fabrics division of Berkshire Hathaway. In the period prior to our acquisition, the company had run at a very substantial loss, with only about 55% of looms in operation in the finishing plant operating at about 50% of capacity. Losses continued on a reduced basis for a few months after acquisition. Outstanding efforts by our manufacturing, administrative and salespeople now have produced major improvements, which, coupled with the general revival in textiles, have moved Wambeck into a significant profit position. We expect a good level of profits from textiles in 1976. Continued progress is being made in the movement of Wambeck goods into areas of traditional marketing strength of Berkshire Hathaway. Productivity should improve in both the weaving and finishing areas at Manchester, and textile demand continues to firm at decent prices. We have great confidence in the ability of Ken Chase and his team to maximize our strengths in textiles. Therefore, we continue to look for ways to increase further our scale of operations while avoiding major capital investment in new fixed assets which we consider unwise, considering the relatively low returns historically earned on large-scale investment in new textile equipment.
Insurance underwriting. The property and casualty insurance industry had its worst year in history during 1975.
We did our share, unfortunately, even somewhat more. Really disastrous results were concentrated in auto and long-tail contracts where settlement of loss usually occurs long after the loss event lines.
Economic inflation, with the increase in cost of repairing humans and property far outstripping the general rate of inflation, produced ultimate loss costs which soared beyond premium levels established in a different cost environment.
Social inflation caused the liability concept to be expanded continuously, far beyond limits contemplated when rates were established, in effect, adding coverage beyond what was paid for. Such social inflation increased significantly both the propensity to sue and the possibility of collecting mammoth jury awards for events not previously considered statistically significant in the establishment of rates.
Furthermore, losses to policyholders which otherwise would result from mushrooming insolvencies of companies inadequately reacting to these problems are divided through guarantee funds among remaining solvent insurers.
These trends will continue, and should moderate any optimism which otherwise might be justified by the sharply increased rates now taking effect. Berkshire Hathaway's insurance subsidiaries have a disproportionate concentration of business in precisely the lines which produced the worst underwriting results in 1975. Such lines produce unusually high investment income and, therefore, have been particularly attractive to us under previous underwriting conditions. However, our mix has been very disadvantageous during the past 2 years, and it well may be that we will remain positioned in the more difficult part of the insurance spectrum during the inflationary years ahead.
The only segment to show improved results for us during 1975 was the home state operation, which has made continuous progress under the leadership of John Ringwalt.
Although still operating at a significant underwriting loss, the combined ratio improved from 1974. Adjusted for excess costs attributable to operations still in the startup phase, underwriting results are satisfactory. Texas United Insurance Company, a major problem a few years ago, has made outstanding progress since George Billing has assumed command. With an almost totally new agency force, Texas United was the winner of the Chairman's Cup for achievement of the lowest loss ratio among the home state companies. Cornhusker Casualty Company, oldest and largest of the home state companies, continues its outstanding operation with major gains in premium volume and a combined ratio slightly under 100. Substantial premium growth is expected at the home state operation during 1976. The measurement of success, however, will continue to be the achievement of a low combined ratio. Our traditional business at National Indemnity Company, representing well over half of our insurance volume, had an extraordinarily bad underwriting year in 1975. Although rates were increased frequently and significantly, they continually lagged loss experience throughout the year. Several special programs instituted in the early 1970s have caused significant losses, as well as a heavy drain on managerial time and energies. Present indications are that premium volume will show a major increase in 1976, and we hope that underwriting results will improve. Reinsurance suffered the same problems as our direct business during 1975. The same remedial efforts were attempted. Because reinsurance contract settlements lag those of direct business, it well may be that any upturn in results from our direct insurance business will precede those of the reinsurance segment.
At our home and automobile insurance company subsidiary, now writing auto business only in the Cook County area of Illinois, experience continued very bad in 1975, resulting in a management change in October. John Seward was made president at that time, and has energetically and imaginatively implemented a completely revamped underwriting approach.
Overall, our insurance operation will produce a substantial gain in premium volume during 1976. Much of this will reflect increased rates rather than more policies. Under normal circumstances, such a gain in volume would be welcome, but our emotions are mixed at present. Underwriting experience should improve, and we expect it to, but our confidence level is not high. While our efforts will be devoted to obtaining a combined ratio below 100, it is unlikely to be attained during 1976. Insurance investments gains in investment income were moderate during 1975 because premium volume remained flat and underwriting losses reduced funds available for investment. Invested assets, measured at cost at year-end, were close to identical with the level at the beginning of the year. At the end of 1974, the net unrealized loss in the stock section of our portfolio amounted to about $17 million, but we expressed the opinion, nevertheless, that this portfolio overall represented good value at its carrying value of cost. During 1975, a net capital loss of $2,888,000 before tax credits was realized, but our present expectation is that 1976 will be a year of realized capital gain. On March 31, 1976, our net unrealized gains applicable to equities amounted to about $15 million. Our equity investments are heavily concentrated in a few companies which are selected based on favorable economic characteristics, competent and honest management, and a purchase price attractive when measured against the yardstick of value to a private owner. When such criteria are maintained, our intention is to hold for a long time. Indeed, our largest equity investment is 467,150 shares of Washington Post, B, stock with a cost of $10.6 million, which we expect to hold permanently. With this approach, stock market fluctuations are of little importance to us, except as they may provide buying opportunities, but business performance is of major importance. On this score, we have been delighted with progress made by practically all of the companies in which we now have significant investments. We have continued to maintain a strong liquid position in our insurance companies. In last year's annual report, we explained how variations of 0.1% in interest rates result in million-dollar swings in market value of our bonds. We consider such market fluctuation of minor importance as our liquidity and general financial strength make it highly improbable that bonds will have to be sold at times other than those of our choice. Banking. It is difficult to find adjectives to describe the performance of Eugene Abig, Chief Executive of Illinois National Bank and Trust of Rockford, Illinois, our banking subsidiary. In a year when many banking operations experienced major troubles, Illinois National continued its outstanding record. Against average loans of about $65 million, net loan losses were $24,000, or 0.04%. Unusually high liquidity is maintained with obligations of the U.S. government and its agencies, all due within 1 year, at year-end amounting to about 75% of demand deposits. Maximum rates of interest are paid on all consumer savings instruments which make up more than $2 million. It consistently has generated favorable earnings. Positioned as we now are with respect to income taxes, the addition of a solid source of taxable income is particularly welcome. General review. Your present management assumed responsibility at Berkshire Hathaway in May 1965.
At the end of the prior fiscal year, September 1964, the net worth of the company was $22.1 million, and 1,137,778 common shares were outstanding, with a resulting book value of $19.46 per share.
10 years earlier, Berkshire Hathaway's net worth had been $53.4 million.
Dividends and stock repurchases accounted for over $21 million of the decline in company net worth, but aggregate net losses of $9.8 million had been incurred on sales of $595 million during the decade.
In 1965, 2 New England textile mills were the company's only sources of earning power and, before Ken Chase assumed responsibility for the operation, textile earnings had been erratic and, cumulatively, something less than zero subsequent to the merger of Berkshire Fine Spinning and Hathaway Manufacturing. Since 1964, net worth has been built to $92.9 million, or $94.92 per share.
We have acquired total, or virtually total ownership of 6 businesses through negotiated purchases for cash, or cash and notes, from private owners, started 4 others, purchased a 31.5% interest in a large affiliate enterprise and reduced the number of outstanding shares of Berkshire Hathaway to 979,569. Overall, equity per share has compounded at an annual rate of slightly over 15%. While 1975 was a major disappointment, efforts will continue to develop growing and diversified sources of earnings. Our objective as a conservatively financed and highly liquid business, possessing extra margins of balance sheet strength consistent with the fiduciary obligations inherent in the banking and insurance industries, which will produce a long-term rate of return on equity capital exceeding that of American industry as a whole. Warren E. Buffett, Chairman. 1976 letter to the stockholders of Berkshire Hathaway Inc. After 2 dismal years, operating results in 1976 improved significantly. Last year we said the degree of progress in insurance underwriting would determine whether our gain in earnings would be moderate or major. As it turned out, earnings exceeded even the high end of our expectations. In large part, this was due to the outstanding efforts of Phil Leach's managerial group at National Indemnity Company. In dollar terms, operating earnings came to $16,073,000, or $16.47 per share. While this is a record figure, we consider return on shareholders' equity to be a much more significant yardstick of economic performance. Here our result was 17.3%, moderately above our long-term average and even further above the average of American industry, but well below our record level of 19.8% achieved in 1972. Our present estimate, subject to all the caveats implicit in forecasting, is that dollar operating earnings are likely to improve somewhat in 1977, but that return on equity may decline a bit from the 1976 figure. Textile operations. Our textile division was a significant disappointment during 1976. Earnings, measured either by return on sales or by return on capital employed, were inadequate. In part, this was due to industry conditions which did not measure up to expectations of a year ago. But equally important were our own shortcomings. Marketing efforts and mill capabilities were not properly matched in our new Wambeck operation. Unfavorable manufacturing cost variances were produced by improper evaluation of machinery and personnel capabilities. Ken Chase, as always, has been candid in reporting problems and has worked diligently to correct them. He is a pleasure to work with,
even under difficult operating conditions. While the first quarter outlook is for red ink, our quite tentative belief is that textile earnings in 1977 will equal, or exceed modestly, those of 1976.
Despite disappointing current results, we continue to look for ways to build our textile operation and presently have one moderate-size acquisition under consideration.
It should be recognized that the textile business does not offer the expectation of high returns on investment. Nevertheless, we maintain a commitment to this division, a very important source of employment in New Bedford and Manchester, and believe reasonable returns on average are possible.
Insurance underwriting casualty insurers enjoyed some rebound from the disaster levels of 1975 as rate increases finally outstripped relentless cost increases. Preliminary figures indicate that the stockholder-owned portion of the property and casualty industry had a combined ratio of 103.0 in 1976, compared to 108.3 in 1975.
100 represents